Good day, Nixers, and once again, welcome to this series about marine electricity and electrical maintenance. In the previous videos, we have discussed about power distribution system. Isa sa mga systems na diniscuss natin is the motor starters, or specifically, the main switchboard starters. And we have discussed that these starters are actually starters for our pumps, starters for our fans, which are actually run by using an electric motor. Now, in today's session, we will explore how to start these electric motors using different electric motor starting methodologies. Prior to that, we will be learning about the various components that are used for motor starting. So this will be our topic of interest, the AC motor starting methodologies. At the end of this lesson, the learner shall be able to identify and explain how each component of a motor starter works, specifically the push button switches, the contactor, the pilot lamps, and the timer relay. Okay? And then we will explain how a holding contact works. And lastly, we will explain the following starting methods for AC motors and its characteristics. And these are the direct online motor starter, the power resistance starting, compensator starting, and the star delta motor starting. So without further ado, let's start. To start our discussion about AC motor starting methodologies, let's first discuss the typical components that are related to motor starting. These are, first of all, the push button switches, and there are two types of this. First is the normally open push button switch. Okay? The other one is the normally closed push button switch. Okay? So these are abbreviated as NO and NC on certain diagrams. Okay? So pag sinabing NO, that's normally open. Pag sinabing NC, that's normally closed. Now, in terms of schematic symbol, so this is the schematic symbol for a normally open contact. Okay? Meaning na normally open contact is that there is no connection, okay, between these points, here and here. Walang connection at the normal state. Okay? Wala ka pang ginagawa, ganyan yung state niya. Walang connection in between these 2 points. Okay? Now, what about a normally closed push button contact or switch? Okay, this one, as you can see here, so we can see that these 2 points are actually connected. Okay, so there is a connection between these 2 points. So in the actual scenario, ito naman yung makikita natin sa loob ng isang normally open na push button switch. Okay, so it is color green. Okay, and there is a disconnect between these 2 points, just like on its schematic symbol. Okay? Now, when we press it, pag pinindot natin yung button, okay, this contact will be in contact with these 2 terminals, and there will be flow of current. Okay? There will be flow of current from this point papunta dito sa kabila whenever the push button is pushed. Okay? In that case, from a normally open na switch to a closed, okay, condition. Now, what about for normally closed push button? So normally, ganito naman yung kanyang forma. Okay, closed, and when we press it or push the button, okay, bababa itong connection, okay, at i-disconnect niya ang 2 points. Okay? There will be no flow of current whenever the push button is pushed. Okay? By the way, yung kulay niya is kulay red. Okay? Unlike doon sa normally open na button na kulay green. So sa forma pa lang, pagpasok mo pa lang sa control room, you will be able to know, this button is actually normally open. This button is actually normally closed based on its color. Okay? So somehow you will be able to imagine the internal structure of that particular push button. Okay? Now, a very important thing to emphasize here is that Kapag in-unpress natin, so we have this push button, okay? Kapag pinress natin, ganito yung mangyayari. Kapag naman in-unpress natin, meaning binitawan natin yung pagkakapindot doon sa button, okay, it will actually return back to its normal state. Kaya sinabi dito, normally open push button. It will actually return to its normal state because of the presence of this spring here. Okay? So this spring, whenever we push this button, okay, yung spring is magre-retract. Okay? But when we remove our hand on the push button, okay, when we remove our finger, okay, the spring will actually go back to its original position. Same with the normally closed na push button. Okay? So those are the different kinds of switches that we will be encountering in motor starters. Okay? Now the next motor starting component, okay, is what we call the pilot lamps. May mga iba't ibang kulay ito. So this will serve as an indicator, okay, whether our motor is running, whether our motor is nakastop, okay, hindi umaandar, or whether there is a particular line voltage. Meron bang voltahe yung linya natin in order for our motor to start. So for each of these colors, there's actually meaning. Okay, merong meaning na kaakibat yung bawat kulay ng ating pilot lamps. So green, it can mean that our motor is running. Red, our motor is on stop condition. And white is if there is a line voltage. Okay? Now another component is the timer relay. So this timer relay is actually will also act as a switch. Pero yung sa kanya lang, there's electromagnetism that is involved. And we will see that later. Okay? Later. So we will be explaining each of these components one by one. Okay? The timer relay can have an on delay, meaning before it turns on, there's a certain delay. Okay? And another is off delay. Before it turns off, there's actually a certain delay. So these are the characteristic of this particular timer relay. The next one is what we call the contactor. Okay? So this one. So yung contactor mga mixers is actually, it works the same as a relay. Kaso nga lang, it is for high power application. So ito na nga yung mga nag-i-involve ng mga motor. Kaya si tinawag contactor because there are many types of contacts that are inside this particular device. Okay? You have this coil contacts. Malalaman ninyo on a contactor na coil contacts yan because of the designation. Okay? Yung A1 tsaka A2 na terminals. Okay? And this is the schematic symbol for the coil of our contactor. This is actually the electromagnetic part, meaning kapag merong kuryente na dumaan dito sa coil na ito, okay, these contacts will actually change its state. Okay? So sir, ano ba yung contact? So this one is actually a normally open contact. So makikita natin there is a gap in between these 2 points. So ang tawag dito is normally open, meaning at its initial state, hindi makakadaan yung kuryente. Okay? So yan. Ang tawag dito sa set of contacts na to class, okay, kung ito ay coil contacts, ito naman is what we call the main contacts. Dito natin sa ibabaw, dito natin i-connecta yung ating line terminals. At dito naman sa ilalim, dito natin i-connect yung ating motor terminals. So saan ito doon sa ating contactor? So this part is actually this one. Line 1, line 2, and line 3. Okay? Ito naman, E1, E2, and E3. Na yung A1 at A2 na diniscuss natin kanina is nandito sa ibabaw. This one, A1 and A2 na terminals. Okay? What about this? Okay? Contacts. Saan natin ito makikita? So these contacts is nasa gilid ng ating contactor. This one, yung mga makikita tayo dito na screw. Okay? So these contacts are actually what we call, this set of contacts are what we call auxiliary contacts or extra contacts. So pwede natin gamitin yan for interlocking, for holding contacts. Okay? Pwede din ikabit natin dyan yung ating mga pilot lamps or indicator lights. Okay? This set of contacts. Okay? So 13, 14 is normally open. So saan yan dito? If we zoom into our contactor, may makikita tayo dito 13 yung nasa ibabaw, okay, 14 yung nasa ilalim. Meaning it's normally open. Ang 21 naman, this one, and 22, may nakalagay dito NC. So meaning this pair of contacts are actually normally closed. Okay? At its original state or normal state, current can pass through. Okay? Sa kabila naman, we have 43 and 44. So ito yan, 43 and 44. And then, ito namang sa ilalim, this is 31 and 32. This one, 31 and 32. These are normally closed na contacts, auxiliary contacts. Again, the coil contacts, the main contacts, and the auxiliary contacts. Okay? So dito natin ilalagay yung ating mga wires, okay, at i-screw natin, okay, to these contactors. Okay? So basically, how a contactor works is that kapag may dumaan na kuryente dito sa ating coil, due to electromagnetism, okay, pag may kuryente na dumaan, magiging magnetic yung ating coil. At pag naging magnet na ito, okay, the contacts will change its state, meaning itong mga normally open magiging closed. Okay? Close, close, close. Line 1, line 2, line 3 will pass through papunta sa ating motor. Okay? And our motor will start running. Okay? So, ganun lang. At ito namang normally closed na contacts dito, pag ito nag-energize, this will become open. Okay? So, yun lang basically yung function nitong contactor. But later on, we will see how control mechanisms are done because of this device. Okay? Now, another thing that bears stressing is itong dito. Okay? So, this is actually what we call a thermal overload relay or simply an overload relay. So, ito siya class. This one, kinakabit to dito sa ilalim sa T1, T2, T3. Okay? And itong nasa ibabaw, T1, T2, T3. And then T1, T2, T3, ito naman, ito yung ikakabit natin sa ating motor. Okay? So this will serve as protection doon sa ating motor. So isipin lang natin class na yung motor, masyadong mahal yan. Okay? Napakamahal ng motor. Okay? So it's very important to protect the motor against overcurrent and other hazardous conditions. Isa nga sa nagpo-protect ka dyan, okay, is our thermal overload relay. And lastly, of course, hindi matatawag to na motor starter kung wala tayong electric motor. Okay? Now again, the typical components of a motor starter is we have push button switches, okay, normally open and normally closed. We have also the pilot lamps. We have also the timer relay, the contactors, and the thermal overload relay. Now, how does these components function? Okay? So, paano ba nagpa-function itong mga components na ito? So, let's look at a simulation para makita natin how current flows through these components, through each of these components, and how switching and control is done using these components.